Bonjour tout le monde. Earlier today, we received the job report for April. These numbers tell us what we already knew, that right now, Canadians are hurting because of this pandemic. Everyone has their own story, but it all boils down to a very difficult time for a lot of people. Canadians aren't alone in this, as the world faces COVID-19. But if you're out of work, you don't need to hear that other people are out of work too. You need to know that there's a plan to get you through this and get you back on the job. And that's exactly what this government is focused on. Aujourd'hui, on a reçu le rapport sur
Today we got the report on jobs for the month of April. And the numbers are confirming what we knew for a while. Canadians are suffering due to this pandemic. And what counts the most for you is to know that there's a plan to help you go through this and get back to work as quickly as possible. And that it is on what our government is focusing on.
This unprecedented challenge, we've taken action. Maybe you're one of the more than 7 million people getting the CERB to help make ends meet. Or better yet, maybe thanks to the wage subsidy, your employer has been able to rehire you. That's what happened for people who work at Pursuit, a Banff tourism company. They're back on the job because of this program. We created the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy to protect jobs wherever possible. Since it launched last week, employers have applied for subsidies for almost 2 million workers. And as provinces and territories start to gradually reopen over the coming months, and the CERB becomes less and less needed, this subsidy will play an even greater role. That's why I can announce today that we will be extending the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy beyond June to help kickstart our economic reopening and boost jobs. We'll have more details next week, but to businesses hit by COVID-19, know this: the wage subsidy will continue to be there for you to help you keep your employees on the payroll. So fill out the application at canada.ca if you haven't already done so. And if you had to let people go, try to bring them back. It's those workers who will drive our economy's short and long-term recovery. On other support, the Canada Emergency Business Account has been accessed by well over 500,000 businesses to give them much-needed loans. Between the CEBA and the wage subsidy, we're helping employers across the country keep Canadians on the job. Now, even though we're reaching millions of Canadians, we need to reach even more. We're working around the clock to update and adjust so that help gets to as many workers, small businesses, families, and young people as possible. We also know that some sectors have been hit especially hard, so we're stepping up on that too. Minister Bains will be leading a new Industry Strategy Council. Chaired by Monique Leroux, this council will take a deeper dive into how the pandemic is affecting specific sectors and how to best support them. We're leveraging expertise from the economic strategy tables we set up in the first mandate, as well as looking to new industry leaders. This will be a dedicated forum for industry and government to come together on tackling the effects of COVID-19. And it builds on what we've already done for workers in everything from energy to agriculture. On that note, Minister Guilbeault will have more details at noon about how our $500 million package for arts, culture, and amateur sport is now being rolled out to support workers in those sectors. This investment will help people access wage support and help organizations access funding. Our artists, creators, and young athletes inspire us and help us feel connected even when we're at home. They're there for us, and we're going to be there for them. No matter where you work, no matter who you are, these are tough times. But with the right plan, we will get through this, and we'll come back stronger than ever. Le Canada
Canada is facing an unprecedented challenge, so we took unprecedented measures. You might be among the 7 million people getting the emergency benefit, or you might have been rehired due to the wage subsidy. We've created this subsidy in order to protect jobs as much as possible. Since the launch of this program last week, employers have already made some requests to the level of up to 2 million workers. And today I'm announcing that we will extend the emergency salary subsidy past the month of June in order to encourage the relaunch of the economy and stimulate job creation. And we will have more details on this next week, but businesses affected by COVID-19 must know this. The wage subsidy will be there for you and your workers. I invite you to make a request on Canada.ca if it's not already done. And if you had to fire people, try to rehire those employees as much as possible. Those are the workers that will help us to relaunch the economy in the short and long term. Canadians want to work, so we will help them to get back to work. With this subsidy and other measures, such as the emergency accounts for businesses, we're helping employers to keep their employees. Today, we also have news for the culture sector. Minister Guilbeault will give more details on this later, but generally we are supporting artists and cultural companies, musicians, young athletes, and their coaches in order to better understand the consequences of the pandemic on different sectors of the economy. We're putting up a council on industrial strategy that will be led by Minister Bains. Chaired by Monique Leroux, this council will have a mission, which is to study the deeper effects of the pandemic in specific sectors and what can we do to support workers. We use the know-how of strategic tables that we've put up in our first mandate, and we are calling on new leaders in the industry. We're going through a tough time right now, but with the right plan, we will get back stronger than ever.
It's hard to think of tougher times for our country, but as our elders remind us, Canada has faced challenges before, and we've always overcome them. Today, we mark the 75th anniversary of Victory in Europe Day and the end of the Second World War on the continent. After 6 years of war, it must have felt like that day would never come, but it did. And it came because of the courage of all who served and because of the sacrifice of all who gave their lives. It has been 75 years since our grandparents and great-grandparents stood up to do their part. 75 years since they stood united and strong to ensure that we would live in peace and freedom. Today, as our generation faces our own battle, let us be inspired by them and their valor as we protect them and all Canadians. This is our challenge, and I know we will rise to meet it. Merci.
Thank you, Prime Minister. We'll now go to the phone lines for questions. One question, one follow-up. Operator?
Thank you. Merci. The first question is from Jamie Tashagumscom from APTN. Line open.
Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister. As we all know, Indigenous communities in the North are vulnerable due to social conditions like lack of housing and lack of medical facilities. And it's been said that Indigenous communities are 2 weeks behind the curve. Now, with provinces relaxing restrictions, some of these communities might see that as a threat. Do you agree with that opinion? And secondly, what would your advice be to those communities?
From the very beginning of this pandemic, we have seen that and known that Indigenous communities, particularly northern and remote ones, are particularly vulnerable to the spread of COVID-19, given existing challenges around medical facilities, things like overcrowding and other socioeconomic realities. That's why from the beginning, we have made specific investments to support Indigenous communities as the country grapples with this pandemic. Right across the country, as certain regions are reopening, there is a recognition that other regions are going to need continued adjustments and continued protections, and we will ensure that we continue to work all together on protecting Indigenous communities who are indeed more vulnerable, even as other parts of the economy are looking at opening up.
Follow up, Jamie?
Yeah, okay, so they've been doing pretty well so far, but like I said, they're 2 weeks behind the curve. So with provinces opening up, what would you suggest that they do?
I think we need to make sure we're keeping extremely vigilant and preventing outside cases from entering those communities. We've seen, for example, Nunavut be very successful, not just remaining 2 weeks behind the curve, but months behind the curve as they continue to have no cases because of very strong travel restrictions that were brought in immediately and have served to keep the vulnerable and remote communities in our far north completely COVID-free. But right across the country, various communities will take appropriate measures, and we will be there as a government and other orders of government as well to support them in doing the things that need to be done to keep elders and all in those communities safe.
Thank you. Next question, operator.
Thank you. Merci. Prochaine question, Michel Lamarche, TVA Nouvelle. À vous.
Bonjour, Monsieur Trudeau. J'aimerais savoir.
Mr. Trudeau, I'd like to know, since you want to extend the wage subsidy, do you want to do the same thing with the Canadian emergency benefit? The emergency benefit has already been extended for a longer time than the wage subsidy, and we acknowledge as well that as the weeks and months coming, the economy will start to get back in action. Less people will need emergency benefit because they will be going back to work. And possibly more people will decide to go for the wage subsidy. So that's why we've decided to extend the impact and the use of these wage subsidy. We will continue to adjust ourselves as the situation evolves. And since the beginning of this crisis, we've been there to adjust the situation and improve our approach in order to help as much people as possible since the current situation.
From the beginning, we recognized that we needed to constantly adjust and improve the delivery of these unprecedented mechanisms to support Canadians who are suffering through this particular crisis. That's why we recognize that there are many different things we need to do as the economy starts to reopen. The Canada Emergency Response Benefit had always been planned to last longer or had a timeline that was already longer than the wage subsidy. But we recognize that as the economy starts to reopen, people will be getting back to work, leaving the emergency response benefit and perhaps going on to the wage subsidy as employers bring people back on and get them back to work as our economy picks up over the coming weeks and months. That's why we will constantly be adjusting to make sure that Canadians are getting the support they need as we look to carefully and gradually restarting our economy.
Un suivi, Michel?
Bien sûr, j'aimerais justement savoir cette subvention salariale.
To know this wage subsidy, for how long, in your mind, we will need to extend it? And facing the reopening of the economy, is there any worries? Could we miss this relaunch because we are coming out too quickly of our homes? Since the beginning, we've underlined how much it's important to relaunch in a gradual fashion and to be extremely vigilant in order to look at how COVID is propagating, and that's why we're investing so massively in terms of our tracking tests, and why also we must make sure that mechanisms are in place across the country as we are relaunching the economy. Now, the wage subsidy will be extended beyond the month of June. We will have more details to say about this next week, but I can already say to companies looking at how they will be able to get closer to the relaunch, they can know that this salary subsidy will be there for a long time still, and they should start to rehire their workers in order to create this link between workers and the jobs in order to relaunch quickly and rightfully the economy.
Thank you. Merci. Next question, Mike Blanchfield, the Canadian Press. Line open.
Hello, Prime Minister. Two successive job reports are showing that women in service roles have been disproportionately affected by the pandemic. In light of that, what specific measures do you think are needed to strengthen Canada's economic recovery?
I think this is one of the first recessions we've ever seen that has so hard hit vulnerable workers in the service sector, particularly women and new Canadians and young people. And that was evident in the March numbers and continues to be the case in the April numbers. What we're seeing, even beyond these reports and these numbers, is the reality on the ground that people who are already vulnerable in the workforce, people who are already disadvantaged or facing extra barriers are always the first to get hit when we have a difficult situation like this. That's why as a society, not only do we need to do what we are doing in the short term to give extra supports to vulnerable people, but we need to make sure that as we move forward to rebuilding and creating a more prosperous Canada in the coming months and years, we think very, very carefully about how important the work is that is being done by women and vulnerable Canadians, and how we need to make sure we're better supporting them, not just for potential future crises, but for business as usual as our country comes back to normal.
This crisis has hit really hard on women, on vulnerable people like new Canadians or youth. And their jobs were among the most, among the first one to disappear. So that's why we've put in place some specific measures to help these vulnerable people, those who are particularly vulnerable. And beyond this crisis, we must think about how, when we will rebuild the economy, we will make sure that those most vulnerable are less vulnerable. In an economy that relaunches, and we need to make sure that in the years coming, we are taking care of everyone in this country in order to have a fairer and more equitable country.
Yes, Prime Minister. Well, given that reality on the ground that you're talking about, and that these vulnerable people are, as you say, the first to get hit, how will you ensure that government stimulus money helps those people first and does not go instead to the bottom line of big corporations?
Well, we are not yet talking about stimulus. We are still very much in the support and emergency phase right now. And that's why from the beginning, the measures we put forward have been entirely focused on Canadians. With the Canada Emergency Response Benefit, that's over 7 million people across this country who have benefited from that. With the wage subsidy that goes to workers. Employers don't keep a penny of that. They pass it through to their workers so that workers have that continued link with their job and get a paycheck that will ensure that as the economy reopens, they will be able to come back to work quickly and smoothly. Our focus every step of the way, even on supporting small businesses, has been ensuring that people are able to keep jobs going for Canadians from coast to coast to coast. We will, over the coming days, start looking at specific sectoral supports for various industries that have been hit particularly hard by COVID-19. But even then, our focus will be on the workers, on the supply chains that involve many, many small businesses across this country for many of these industries, and not on the corporate well-being of an industry or of a sector, but indeed staying focused on helping Canadians, because it is Canadians who are at the heart of our economic success, at the heart of our success as a country, and as a government, we will always stay focused on them.
Thank you. We'll take one more question on the phone. Operator?
Thank you. Merci. Prochaine question, Marie Vastel, Le Devoir, à vous.
Oui, bonjour, M. Trudeau. J'aimerais revenir sur la...
Mr. Trudeau, first on the Canadian emergency benefit, we see schools and daycare centers are starting to open up quickly, but there's a big question about if teachers or daycare monitors should go back, daycare workers should go back to work, and if they have worries that they use the emergency benefit and decide not to go. The Quebec government says it's in a correct or safe working environment. Is it a question of if there's a personal worry, should it be enough to not showing up to work and get the emergency benefit? And in no moment in a crisis, no Canadian should be working in a situation where there's a worry for their safety and health. We have standards that are really precise, really important across the country to make sure that in normal time, workers are doing their job safely. Now, during this pandemic, those worries are even higher. And so that's why in the principles that we put in place with provinces and territories, this element of safety at work is on the forefront of any economic relaunch, and we're expecting that working conditions in which people will find themselves, even in essential working work sectors, are safe, so that people feel they can trust that they're going to work in a safe environment.
One of the things that is fundamental in Canada is that no one, whether in crisis times or in regular times, should be working in a job in conditions that are unsafe or put them at risk. That is a fundamental principle of Canada that we will always ensure to uphold. In this particular situation, there are heightened concerns about health for a large number of people, for everyone, but particularly and even in essential work sectors. We need to make sure that we are putting in place all the necessary measures so that people can feel confident about their own safety, about having minimized the risks as they get back to work. That's why we put that as one of the fundamental principles that needs to be in place before any sector talks about reopening the economy. That was part of the principles agreed to by the provinces and the federal government on relaunching our economy.
Suivi, Mary?
Merci. Cela dit, vous parlez des conditions.
That said, you're talking about conditions that need to be respected, that this workplace be safe, but who determines if the workplace is safe or not? Like, I'm asking the question again. Can someone decide on his own or her own that they don't feel safe of not going to work in a daycare center? Or should the government be deciding of the legitimacy of a request of not going to work and asking for emergency benefit money? Like in any situation, it will be based on different cases. The government will certainly have things to say regarding the need of different sectors or different industries, but we know as well that in certain cases, if it's the case of a person that takes care of an elder at home and they're particularly vulnerable or have a pre-existing medical condition, then the levels of protection that they would need could vary. And I believe that we will all have to work extremely carefully and reasonably in order to make sure that the measures are in place to protect people. There will be eventually a relaunch of the Canadian economy in this relaunch, will there be any sector of the economy that you will give a privilege? Shouldn't it be a time now to give priority to certain in this economy, to relaunch correctly the economy? I think the priority is to relaunch the economy for Canadians, for workers in many sectors and across the economy. But at the same time, of course, we will have to think on how this relaunch can be done in a safe way due to the continual reality of COVID-19, but also other thoughts that we have. We all learned that there are challenges and opportunities to work at home, from home, and there will be a need to invest maybe more in the digital and to go faster into that conversion than what happened before. We will continue our fight against climatic change. I think a relaunch will give us the opportunity to do more in that sense in many sectors. I believe it's important to think about what could Canada look like in 1, 5, or 10 years and work in that direction. But at the same time, what we want is to be able to relaunch or restart and recreate prosperity for all Canadians. We saw in the numbers this morning that youth is particularly hard hit by the loss of jobs. Would you want to extend help for students already? Emergency help for students will be there up to August. We know that students, when they're typically end their school years at university or college, they take a job for the summer in order to help them to pay for to meet their needs and for the school year. So help to students is there to replace all these thousands of jobs that won't be there for you this summer. And we know still that youth want to work. They will look in the jobs that the government is creating, and with the program of Canada Summer Job and with new programs to help in particular sectors that are particularly vulnerable or affected by COVID-19. But we have measures in place in order to help youth in order to get by the month of September and return to class.
Just how some groups are getting hit disproportionately hard, thinking young people, thinking women. What specifically can the government do as the recovery begins to make sure that these groups aren't permanently set back?
I think the idea of permanent challenges is particularly poignant for young people, where we know that a summer without work experience, a summer where they are struggling to pay their groceries or their rent, is a significant setback in their march towards economic independence and successful outcomes after their schooling. That's why we put in place the Canada Emergency Student Benefit to help them this summer make sure that there aren't long-term impacts. On women particularly that we've seen have been extremely impacted by this economic challenge as well as a health challenge. We have moved forward on supports for them, particularly more emergency supports for women who are facing challenges of domestic violence. But at the same time, we know we have to do more. The importance of childcare has been yet again emphasized, that as we move towards an economic restarting, there needs to be more and secure childcare spaces for people to get back into the workforce. These are the kinds of things that we're going to have to think about, both in the immediate but also for the longer term, to make sure that equality in this country is more than just a goal, but is a concrete reality. I
believe there are many things that are worrying us regarding the years coming. And groups like youth, women, could find themselves with negative echoes of this crisis for many years to come, more than others. Regarding youth, and that's why we've put in place the Canadian Emergency Benefit for students that will support them for this summer down to the month of August, or up to the month of August, so that they can continue their study without having too much impact due to the crisis while creating more opportunities or working opportunities so that many of them can still have the necessary experience that will be very useful for them in the years coming. Now, regarding women, we know that there's still more to do in order to be a fairer society, more help for centers and refuge centers or shelters for women that are facing domestic violence can be done. And we know that there's more to be done. Access to the daycare centers will be extremely important for the relaunch and for families, and particularly women. And that's why we are currently looking at what we can do on this front.
Transit in Toronto, the TTC is going to be making some historic cuts to its service because of the pandemic. Transit groups have been calling on the federal government to provide emergency funding, keep buses, trains rolling, get emergency or essential workers to their jobs. Is that something that the government could look at?
This government has made historic investments in transit over the past years. We recognize that public transit is an essential part of growing the economy, of helping our cities, and mostly helping people be able to get to work from home in a reliable way. That's why we believe so deeply in transit. Operation of transit is more of a municipal and provincial responsibility, and we hope to see the provinces stepping up on supporting this essential element of the economic relaunch. People are going to need to be able to get to and from work as we want to get the economy going again. But the federal government is always looking to be a partner in helping out in terms of economic relaunch wherever we can.
Prime Minister, Rachel Haynes from CTV National News. Last week, you were saying that help is coming for seniors. They have been asking for the last few weeks where the help for them is. You're talking about the Canada Emergency Response Benefit, which gives $2,000 to the people who you say need it most. But seniors are still vulnerable and they still need to pay their rent and their groceries. And they're saying that the government programs that they receive still don't add up to $2,000. So why do some people deserve $2,000 from the government and other people don't?
First of all, we have worked very, very hard to help all Canadians with replacement of income that has been lost during this. We knew that workers who were expecting to get a paycheck to be able to pay for their groceries, to be able to pay for their rent, and suddenly because of COVID-19 lost their job, and there were millions of them, as we saw in the recent job numbers today. Needed to get that income replacement. And we did that with the Canada Emergency Response Benefit. Seniors, many of whom are on fixed incomes, did not see that disappearance of their income at the same time, although some did, and many qualify for the CERB, even as seniors, and therefore are getting the support. At the same time, however, we recognize that there are additional costs and additional vulnerabilities that seniors have been facing, and that's why we have made investments, whether it's through increasing the GST supplement that hits many, many vulnerable seniors, whether it's through new programs that are supporting seniors in vulnerable situations. And like I said, we'll have more to say very soon on how we continue to support the seniors who built us this extraordinary country and to whom we owe so much thanks.
Our priority right off the bat was to replace the revenue of those who all suddenly lost their job due to COVID-19. And those were people who were expecting for paychecks, expecting paychecks to pay for their grocery, pay for their rent. And we had come up with quickly with the measures, and we see quickly that 7 million of Canadians getting this benefit, and in an emergency and an essential fashion. Other groups like elders, where there's many who are qualifying as well for this emergency benefit because they had work revenue, even if they haven't lost from their pension funds or their fixed revenues, see more costs or more challenges due to COVID-19. And that's why we took measures that had an impact on them, whether it's the increase of the GST return that helped so many elders, whether it's a specific program supporting them, we're there for them. And as I said, we will continue to be there for them. We will have announcements in the days coming on how we will help, particularly our most vulnerable elders who are going through some tough times, and both in terms of health and for the economy.
Question. You said that people don't have to go back to work if they don't feel safe there. Yesterday, workers outside of the Cargill meat plant, which is the largest outbreak in Canada, are saying that they don't feel safe going to work, even though their employers are saying that they've put measures in place. Should these workers be staying home, and what do you say to them if they're not feeling safe?
I'm not going to weigh in on specific cases in provincial jurisdiction, but I will say that it is a well-established principle in Canada and a hallmark of our values as a country that no one should be asked to work in unsafe conditions. That applies during a pandemic as well. We have put in many measures across various industries to minimize the risk, particularly around essential work. But we're going to have to be very careful to ensure that we're doing what we need to do right across the country, businesses, orders of governments, and all Canadians, to ensure the safety of the people who are working to provide for the rest of us.
Good morning, Prime Minister. Brian Mullen, Global News. Taiwan has donated 500,000 surgical masks needed by Canadian healthcare workers on the front lines of the pandemic. Your foreign minister wouldn't thank the country by name. Will you?
I'm happy to thank Taiwan for its generous donation. It is important at this point that Canadians and all people around the world pull together to be there for each other, because this is a global challenge that is going to face a global response. We need to do this together, and we will.
Marika Walsh with the Globe and Mail. The former Prime Minister of Australia, Malcolm Turnbull, says China is a bully, and that the way for Canada to deal with China is to stand up for it instead of backing down. Is your government standing up to China, or is it backing away from China?
My responsibility as Prime Minister is to make sure that we're providing for Canadians and keeping Canadians safe. That's the job people expect me to do, and that is exactly what I'm doing. We're going to ensure that Canadians have the equipment, the supplies, the support they need to make it through this pandemic. And of course, at the same time, we will be asking difficult questions about how we're making it through this pandemic, how this came to happen, how we can learn from this. There'll be plenty of time for questions in the months to come. My focus, rightly, is on doing everything I can to help Canadians through this.
So are you standing up for China?
Merci beaucoup tout le monde.